The nurse's hands were trembling as she held the clipboard. But it wasn't from exhaustion this time. After 16 straight hours in the COVID ward, after watching 3 patients flatline in a single shift, after peeling off her PPE to find her skin raw and her soul hollowed out, Sarah Chen stood in the hospital parking lot at 3 a.m. and discovered she'd forgotten her own daughter's birthday. The realization hit harder than any of the deaths she'd witnessed that night. She slid down against her car, still in her scrubs, and wept into her hands while the February wind cut through the empty lot. 3 miles away, in a cramped studio apartment above a laundromat, Marcus Webb was teaching himself to read at 42 years old. The secret shame he'd carried since dropping out of school in 3rd grade to help his dying mother had followed him through 2 decades of menial jobs, fake smiles, and carefully constructed excuses. But tonight, hunched over a children's book he'd stolen from a little free library, something shifted. His daughter, Keisha, had asked him to read her a bedtime story earlier that evening. The look in her 6-year-old eyes when he'd said he was too tired, that look of quiet disappointment she tried so hard to hide, had shattered something in him. He wouldn't let his shame become her burden. Neither Sarah nor Marcus knew they were about to collide in a way that would change not just their lives, but the entire city. It started with a coat. Sarah found it 2 weeks later, draped over a bench at the bus stop near the hospital. February in Detroit meant temperatures that could kill, and the coat was good, a men's North Face parka, barely worn, probably worth $200. Her first instinct was to take it to Lost and Found. But then she saw him, an elderly man sleeping on cardboard behind the bus shelter. Shaking so violently his teeth chattered. She didn't think. She just walked over and laid the coat across him like a blanket. The man's eyes opened. They were startlingly clear, almost luminous in the streetlight. "You don't know me," he said, his voice stronger than she expected. "Why would you do that?" Sarah thought about her daughter's birthday, about all the moments she'd missed, about the patients whose hands she'd held as they took their last breaths. "Because someone should," she said simply. The old man sat up slowly, pulling the coat around his shoulders. "My name is Walter. I was a teacher for 40 years. Lost everything when my wife got sick. Medical bills." He laughed bitterly. "Isn't that something? Taught 1,000 kids to read and write, and now I'm freezing to death outside a hospital." Sarah sat down beside him on the cold bench. She should have been getting home. She should have been sleeping. Instead, she said, "Tell me about your students." Walter's face transformed. For the next hour, he told her stories about the girl with dyslexia who became a lawyer, the boy from the foster system who discovered he could paint, the shy kid who found her voice through poetry. His hands moved as he talked, painting pictures in the air, and Sarah realized he wasn't just remembering his students. He was grieving the loss of purpose, the theft of identity that comes when the world decides you're invisible. "I could still teach," Walter said quietly. "I've got nothing else, but I've still got that." An idea sparked in Sarah's exhausted brain. "Where?" That's where Marcus came in. Sarah had seen him at the hospital 3 times in the past month. Always in the waiting room, never going in. The 4th time, she approached him. "Are you okay? Can I help you with something?" Marcus looked at her with eyes full of fear and something else. Hope. Maybe, or desperation. "I need to learn to read," he said, the words tumbling out like a confession. "I've got a daughter. She deserves a father who can read her stories, who can help with homework, who isn't a—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I saw a flyer about adult literacy classes, but they're expensive. I've been sitting out here for weeks, trying to work up the courage to ask if there's any way, any payment plan or something." Sarah felt the pieces clicking together. "What if I told you I knew someone who could teach you? Someone who needs to teach as much as you need to learn?" The program started small. Walter, Sarah, and Marcus met in the hospital's cafeteria after hours. When the night shift slowed and the fluorescent lights hummed over empty tables, Walter brought books from the library. He still had his library card, he said with a mix of pride and sadness. Marcus brought a determination that Sarah found humbling. He worked maintenance at a warehouse during the day and practiced his letters late into the night, falling asleep with phonics worksheets on his chest. But word spread the way hope always does. quietly at first, then building into something undeniable. A janitor asked if he could join, then a cafeteria worker, then a patient's mother who confessed. She'd never learned English properly and was terrified of parent-teacher conferences. Within 6 weeks, 12 people gathered around those cafeteria tables 3 nights a week, and Walter moved through them like a conductor before an orchestra, his whole being alive again with purpose. Sarah watched it unfold while navigating her own darkness. The pandemic still raged. Patients still died. She still missed dinners and birthdays and school plays. But these nights, watching Walter teach and Marcus struggle and succeed, watching human beings lift each other up in the smallest, most profound ways, it reminded her why she'd become a nurse in the first place. Then the hospital administration found out. Sarah was called into a meeting on a Tuesday morning, still groggy from a night shift. The director of operations, a thin woman with expensive glasses and zero warmth, slid a folder across the desk. "You're running an unauthorized program using hospital facilities. You've allowed a homeless individual access to our building outside of visiting hours. This is a liability nightmare, Dr. Chen. I'm a nurse, not a doctor," Sarah said quietly. "And Walter isn't homeless anymore. We helped him find housing. That's not the point. The point is you've overstepped. This ends today, or you face disciplinary action." Sarah walked out of that office and went straight to the cafeteria. It was 10 a.m., and Marcus was there on his lunch break practicing with Walter. He was reading aloud from The Giving Tree, his voice halting but sure. When he finished, he looked up with tears in his eyes. "I read that to Keisha last night," he said. "My daughter. I read her a whole book." Walter gripped his shoulder, and Sarah saw the old teacher wipe at his own eyes. She made her decision in that moment. She pulled out her phone and started recording. "Marcus, would you tell me what this program has meant to you?" He did. So did the others when they arrived that evening. The janitor who was now helping his grandson with homework. The cafeteria worker who'd passed her citizenship test. The mother who'd spoken at PTA for the first time. Sarah posted the video on social media that night with a simple caption. "The hospital wants to shut this down." Should they? By morning, it had gone viral. By afternoon, local news trucks were in the parking lot. By evening, the hospital was receiving hundreds of calls, and the story had been picked up nationally. The director of operations called Sarah back in, but this time the CEO was there too. "You should have come to us," he said, but he was smiling slightly. "We could have helped make this official. We will make it official. We're launching the Walter Webb Adult Literacy Initiative, funded by the Hospital Foundation. Full program, proper space, even a small salary for Mr. Webb," Walter cried when they told him. Marcus stood beside him, one hand on the old man's shoulder, and Sarah thought about how 3 people who'd felt invisible had somehow made each other seen. The program grew. Other hospitals started similar initiatives. Walter trained new teachers, former students of his who'd heard the news and wanted to give back. Marcus finished his GED and enrolled in community college, talking about maybe becoming a teacher himself someday. Sarah's daughter, Emma, started volunteering, reading with younger students, and Sarah realized she'd given her daughter something more valuable than her constant presence. She'd shown her what it meant to show up for people who needed you. On the 1-year anniversary of that first night in the cafeteria, they held a celebration. 50 students had learned to read. 12 had earned their GEDs. 3 had enrolled in college. Walter stood before them all, 83 years old and fully alive, and said, "I spent 40 years teaching because I thought it was my job. I spent 1 year teaching because it was my salvation. Thank you for saving my life by letting me live it with purpose." Marcus read a poem he'd written, halting still but beautiful. Sarah's daughter hugged her tight and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Mom." That night, driving home through the city, Sarah thought about how easily she could have walked past that coat, past Walter, past the opportunity to see someone who needed to be seen. She thought about how Marcus could have kept hiding, and Walter could have kept disappearing, and how all of them could have stayed small and separate and safe. Instead, they'd chosen courage. They'd chosen connection. They'd chosen to title her, that elderly woman pushing her cart, who joined the program last month, that teenage mother who came seeking help, that immigrant father who wanted to read to his children, That person who felt invisible and was made visible again through the simple, radical act of human kindness. The world is full of coats waiting to be given, of teachers waiting to teach, of students waiting to learn. We're all just waiting for someone to see us, to reach out, to say, "You matter. Your struggle matters. Let me help carry this with you." Sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with the smallest acts of decency. Sometimes changing the world just means changing one person's world. And sometimes, when we're brave enough to be kind, brave enough to be vulnerable, brave enough to let others in, we discover we're not saving them at all. They're saving us.